We're here to talk about Thief from 1981. It's Michael Mann's directorial debut for a feature film. He did have one other. It was called The Jericho Mile, if I'm not mistaken. It was a TV movie, but this is considered his debut feature. So, this movie, Thief, directed by Michael Mann. Michael Mann, I've seen one other movie from him. I have seen Heat, which was great. Oh, two others, actually, now that I'm looking at the list. I've also seen Collateral, which I didn't know he directed at the time of watching it. And honestly, he's directed a lot of films that I had heard of before that I didn't actually know were him directing, and a few ones that I just haven't seen. So I've seen Heat and Collateral. I really, really like them both. I think Heat was just this giant crime epic with some of like Scorsese's main men, like Al Pacino. And so it just felt, I connected it to Scorsese for a long time. I knew the director was Michael Mann, but I was like, wow, this guy's like, has a similar style and everything. But now seeing Heat and knowing that Collateral is by Michael Mann, like the differences in their filmmaking can be found. And these movies feel very cerebral, and this one specifically feels very introverted on James Caan character's Frank. And I think that there's clearly a lot of research that went into the movie, and after looking at interviews and just reading some articles, there definitely was. The TV film that he worked on before this was about a prison, and then he got interested in just that subject matter, and he met with a lot of like prisoners, spent time at a prison doing research, and that really helped make this movie come to life. So some of his other movies are Black Hat and Manhunter, Miami Vice, Public Enemies, Ali, and also The Insider. And The Insider was nominated for Best Picture, Director, and Best Screenplay. So few accolades there. I don't know if any of the other films were nominated. I think those were the only ones that I noted when I was writing everything down. But yeah, so those are his movies. Now that I know that he's directed many of, because like I've heard things like Miami Vice, and then maybe I've just in my mind link it to like Inherent Vice by PTA, and then I've heard of Black Hat, but I'm like, oh, that's just like a Johnny Depp movie, and then maybe it's overlooked now that I know it's Michael Mann. And then I've heard of Public Enemies as well. Is that like a gangster movie? I just didn't know much about that one. And Ali, I had no clue. I guess that kind of skews away from what seems to be his style as like these crime movies that are just inside that world of crime and these focused on these people inside that world. But alas, this movie, Thief, had a $5.5 million budget, and it grossed $11 million worldwide, which is great. That's awesome. So from this point on, there will be spoilers for the movie Thief, if you care about the spoilers. I'm just going to go through the plot a bit, talk about the important characters, some of the important themes. And so, the beginning of this movie, one of the very first shots is like panning down from a building. It looks like an apartment complex in Chicago, and it's super rainy. And throughout the entire film, the entire landscape of Chicago is just covered in water, but it's not raining. It's just always wet and always glossy. The lights are so bright. They're so neon. And I noticed specifically in this scene that's on the screen right now, like the depth of field, the shallow depth of field, and the lights in the back, like they get so circular and just so more, I don't want to say surreal, so more abstract. And it just provides such an interesting backdrop for the entire film. And the look of the entire film was something that I noticed throughout the film that was absolutely beautiful. I know there were a few shots of cars driving. There was this one that everything was super dark. Like the entire road. It was one where there was a bridge right here. There's a road that goes up to like merge with the highway there. And like all this space here was super dark. Like the bridge was making this huge shadow. You could tell the lights along this road going up to the bridge were leading that line, and then the car drove down that line, and you see the rear headlights, and just those lights and the slight reflections on the wet ground kind of placed you in that location because everything was so dark and so dirty, but like it was absolutely beautiful. It was awesome. And I looked at that and I was like, wow, that's just like a painting right there. There's just a few moments where I stopped and I was like, this is like this seems so simple, and you're using darkness in such an interesting way. And man, it really gave a lot to this film stylistically, which what could have been a narrative that was relatively simple, but Michael Mann really brought his A game production wise. So that was great to see. So that was the first shot, and it was like panning down, everything's super wet, and it felt very interesting. And the very first thing that I thought was, you have these apartment complexes, this darkness, this grittiness, and then you have the score, the synth score from Tangerine Dreams, which I will get to in later because that was an incredible match for this. And the synth score, for some reason, reminded me very much of Blade Runner. And it gave me that vibe off the beginning, which was an interesting connection, I thought. Because I love Blade Runner, and I talked about it last week when I was talking about the Blade Runner effect, where you watch a movie the first time and you hate it, and then you watch it again and you absolutely love it. But alas, the score from Blade Runner for me is super iconic. Like the score that hits when he's talking about the tears in the rain, the monologue in the rain, and just throughout the film, the score with the synths and everything. This is kind of more like a more upbeat version of that score, but nevertheless, the instruments sound very similar. And it's just, you wouldn't expect that from a crime movie like this. And it was such an interesting choice that I really dug. Because even though these scores have been used for different movies, I can't put my finger on like a different crime movie that uses a score like this. Usually a crime movie would be a more traditional, just like, action-y kind of score, right? The intense music, the low drowning. But this is like very synthy and very like otherworldly. I feel like if I'm trying to describe the music, most crime movies have music that's very grounded, very, very rugged. But this one felt more, not angelic, but more ethereal. But then still had that intensity because it was more fast-paced compared to like a Blade Runner. But yeah, it was interesting. It was a weird connection to make at the beginning of the movie. I was like, well, what am I getting into? I thought this was just a movie about a guy being a thief. I thought it was going to be like Heat, where just doing a bunch of crime stuff. But then he does get to the crime stuff. So at the very beginning of the movie, we are placed in Chicago, and they are coordinating a heist. They're in the middle of a heist. So he has a few guys who are helping him out. He has his buddy, what's his face? His buddy, I have it written down here. Let me find it. His buddy Barry, and he's working with some wires. And then you also just have this guy in the van, and he's kind of like radioing to them and everything. So he breaks in, and it's really cool. He's breaking into the safe, and he has this drill, and you can see all the metal bits like coming off of the safe. And then he makes the hole in there, and then you see all the lock insides. And then he just takes like this metal bar and just like hammers it into the lock bits, and that does the job. And I saw an interview after where what's his face? Where Frank, James Caan, can't believe such a legendary name escaped my brain for a moment, where he was saying like they had him do this stuff for real, use the real equipment, and when he got to that point, he didn't know what to do when he saw all that stuff in there, and he just took a metal piece and he just went at it, and it worked. And that's just crazy. And that's another thing for this movie that you have to give such high praise for, and it was just so interesting to see like the detail that went into the actual thieving scenes. So I'll get into the final heist scene later, but this first one established it right away, because the thieving scenes, the robberies, they take time with them. It's not a montage as you might think. It takes time to drill into the hole. We linger on it for a bit. We see all the metal pieces come out of the safe. And yeah, also we get to see the insides of the safe, the lock bits that he hammers through, things like that. And it was just incredible to see, and especially at the later heist scene that I'll get into later. So put a pin in that. So after they successfully rob those diamonds or whatever's from the safe, they go about their merry way. They do this thing where they give it off to the guy in the van, but then the other two, they drive away in a car. They put it in this garage. They grab these other cars, blah, blah, blah. Got to cover your tracks, of course. And so I think it was the next day, he sent Barry to go collect the money from this guy, but the guy was murdered, splattered all over the whatever street, I believe what Barry said. So he calls up Frank and he's like, yeah, we got a problem. This guy was killed and we can't get our money. So they know somebody is in on it. And so the connection was that I didn't 100% understand in the movie, and I kind of got some detail on it while looking up the plot later. So the guy who took the money at the beginning that was supposed to give it to them after, his name was Joe Gags. And he, at the same time as working with Frank, was working with this other company and has been like skimming money to them for a bit now. And so I forget how they figure this out. They find out that he was part of this company as well. And so Frank, he goes to confront the boss who was at the front of like some part dealership, and so he walks through the first reception area with a bunch of women who are working. And he's like, oh yeah, I just need to meet with this guy. Then he goes in, of course. And then he says, oh, hey, where's my money? I want my money. And then the guy's like, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, huh? Typical. And then he pulls a gun on him. And I think it was the Canopy thumbnail. It was him with the gun pointing it at him with the window in the background. Great shot. Iconic. And so, yeah, so he tries to get the money from him, but he still just plays stupid. And so then he leaves and he has the gun and all the reception people are looking at him weird. And so after that, what happens? After that, he gets to this meeting. Right. I'm trying to remember exactly. So he tells the guy, okay, you got a few hours. Was it 24? Maybe, I don't know if it was like half a day or a whole day, but he's like, you got this short amount of time to get me my money or else. And then so they set up this meeting, and then instead of him, it's Leo, who is the big bad crime boss of the movie. And Leo, he does the typical like, oh yeah, hey, your stuff's super impressive. You're so good at what you do. Wait, what do I have here? Oh no, that's not the one. Okay. We'll still deal with this. I have a few screenshots that'll kind of show the progression of the movie. So, yeah, then we get introduced to Leo, who is played by Robert Prosky. And so Leo says, hey, why don't you join me? I got some big scores, and I got some big money to be made. Sign like this multi-year contract with me, and then we can get things going. That's what it felt like. It felt like it was like a sports negotiation, like, hey, if you sign this 5 heist deal with me, you'll get this certain amount. But if you just do one, it's just like a certain amount up front, not as much. But alas, he says no. He's like, nah, I don't want to deal with it. And also during the scene, there was like the police on their trail the whole time who were just like watching them. Who's like, oh, we know this big crime boss, but who's this new guy? Who's this new guy that we've never seen before? And so Frank, then after that, he goes and he's like, well, okay, whatever. I think that's when the cops confront him for the first time. They're just like, hey, buddy, what's up? What's up with all the crime that you do? And he's like, man, I just own I own a car store, a used auto salesman. And they're like, okay, but we're watching you. And then so he goes to this diner, and he's been to this diner many a times in the past, and he asks out Jesse, who is played by Tuesday Weld. And it was a very rushed romance. And I think when I saw it in the moment, part of that can be attributed, or when I saw it in the moment, I was like, yeah, this is very rushed, very weird. It's like he's seen her for like months at a time, working there all the time. And he's like, oh, I've seen you here for months at a time. Why do you think I'm coming back? You weren't expecting me to ask you out? And then they have this the conversation in the diner. Here, see, I got my second visual aid now. And then here, let me frame this nicer. Let me grab this. Boom. So then they have this conversation in the diner after she begrudgingly follows him there. And this scene was great. This scene showed a lot of the backstory for James Caan's character, Frank. So, throughout this scene, a lot is revealed. It's revealed that he was in prison from age, I think it was like about 20 to 30. And that's what I was going with, where it explains some of the things that he's doing. He's been in prison for so long that he's not accustomed to normal life outside the prison. And so once they start talking, we get revealed to that backstory. We get revealed that he stole $40. He went to prison. He got more time because he was gotten in a fight. And there's a great quote about the mental fight or fortitude that he has to build up while in prison. He says, you got to get to where nothing means nothing. And that's kind of what his whole speech is about. Then he goes on this great story about how in prison, there's this big bad prison boss. And they did this thing where they brought him up to a certain room and they gangbanged people, younger guys. And if they put up a fight, they beat them to death. And he heard word that he was next. And so when the time came where he thought he was going to get taken, he beat up a guard, smacked him in the shins with this pipe or something, and then he beat up the main bad guy. But of course, he got absolutely destroyed as well. Went to the hospital ward for a long time. But then the other guy was so messed up, and he died shortly after because of whatever brain injuries that he gave him. And to that, it was a success for him because he got out alive, and he was able to do that because he had gotten to a mental state where nothing meant nothing. He didn't care if he lived or if he died. And the way James Caan told it, I'm sure it was better than the way I'm telling it here right now. But yeah, it was great, the way he told the story. And she's just in awe. And there was a great part where he's it kind of oh, you should have seen the other guy. Where it's he got beat up. And then the other guy went to, the other guy got brain injuries and died shortly after. He's oh yeah, it's a real loss to the planet Earth. And she just gave this smile. And then that moment, I'm okay, she's in now. She's in. And they're going to be together. Yeah, but the way he told the story, absolutely incredible scene. And then after that, his points were, he showed her his collage that he got. I really liked his collage as well, because it's kind of his more sensitive side, But he showed her this collage where it's what he wants in life. And it has things like a house, there's a kid, and then there's a woman who represents her. He made it all from magazine and newspaper cutouts. Very collagey. Then there's this line of skulls on the right-hand side. And it's there to remind him that, at the end of the day, everybody dies. And that's what's on the inside. And I don't know, that one piece of paper came back later in the film as well. But it was, it's an interesting look into the psychology of this guy, as well as the scene in general. It just it made this character, it elevated this character so much from what he was at the beginning of this movie. The scene was just amazing. And then they also, I don't know did they talk about it in this scene? His friend Okla, who was in prison. He's been in prison for a while, and he has some sort of disease, and he's not going to last very long. And he tells Frank when Frank goes to visit him, get me out of here. I don't want to die in prison. And that was a great conversation because it's him opening up about this girl that he met. Yeah, so this must have been after the scene. Him opening up about this girl that he met. And you can tell that their bond is so much more than them both being criminals. And he's the one person that he'd go to with this sensitive topic to him and personal topic. And yeah, it was a great scene. And yeah, so after that, oh yes, actually at the end of this diner scene, he says to her, or she says to him, oh, she can't have babies. And he's oh, that's going to mess up your plan. I'm sorry. And then he's oh, we can adopt, blah, blah, blah. And then she's no, but your lifestyle is just too much. And he's okay, one big score, and I'll be out, and we can figure this out. So there, bam. I guess that's kind of a cliche, but the one big score and I'm out. And of course, it doesn't always go well. But that's what happens. So things that happened after that. So then we get he's getting all buddy with Leo, and Leo tells him about his family and everything. Leo helps him get a house, helps him get a baby. They go to the adoption center, and he just yells at the lady at the adoption center, which was a great scene. Another one that just shows that he is not accustomed to life outside of prison very well. Yeah, so Leo helps him get a baby, a house. Was there anything else that he helps him get? I forget. But after that, he has to do the heist. So we get to the final heist, and it was great. Oh no. I forgot. He also helped get Okla out of prison. That was the one other thing that he did. He pulled some strings. And before even getting to like talk to him on the street like a normal person, they go to the hospital. He has one quick couple lines with his friend, and then his friend dies right in front of him. And it was like, all this effort has gone into getting him out, and he just dies right after. But that was his point. He wanted to get out and die on his own terms, not die in prison. And I felt like that was a very important and impactful scene, because it definitely relates to Frank's character later on. And it was done great. So after that, we get to the final heist. The final heist. Here, I have a picture of it as well. The final heist was so sick. It was so good. So well done. And even more from like what I said before. The fact that the heist takes so long. So first, they're on the roof. And they like weld into this elevator shaft. Or they just like break into this elevator shaft. And you have things like, there's this giant batch of wires, super thick. And there's so many wires, and he has this device that tells like the voltage. And so they're talking to each other, and they can tell what kind of line it is. Like, oh, that's a phone line based on this amount of voltage. And so they need to cut off certain like security lines, blah, 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 whatever. And then they also have this thing that they set up earlier where Barry goes in and overhears them saying the code word that they need to do, because it's over like a radio signal rather than a typical phone signal. So then they break in after they cut those lines, which is very cool. Like they took their time with establishing like they go through quite a few lines before they get to the ones that they need. So they go in, they say the code word, which I forget what it was. Oh, dang, I should have remembered. And then they take their sweet time opening the safe with this giant rod. And apparently they actually did it. Like they got this real safe. It was over like 4,000 degrees. And it just looked so cool when it was happening. It's like the contrast between just the bright light of them breaking in, their bodies, just the darkness all around. And it took so long. You could see like some of the melting. There was like shots from the inside as well that had like the melting and everything. And it just worked so well. And this scene, I was like, this movie deserves the title Thief. It earned it. Because, yeah, there's not much else to say. I want to analyze it more, but it's like they just showed it, how it's done in its entirety. And it just worked so well. So well. And so, after they break in, they steal whatever, diamonds, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this great shot where they break in. Barry's taking all the diamonds, putting them into this bag. And he's like, it's a long, lingering shot on him for maybe like a minute. He's like huffing and puffing. He's all sweaty. He gets a chair, gets this fancy chair that he's just pushed to the side. Because it was like a fancy room before they started just drilling everything. And he just sits down and he starts smoking and he's just chilling there. And he's like, all right, we did the heist. Now I can go about my life. This is it. This is my one time. And now I'm out. And just lingering on that shot, you knew exactly what he was thinking in that moment. And it was great. That was great as well. So, after they do this heist, he's happy. They go to the beach. Him and his wife. Him and his kid. Barry and his wife. They're all just having a good time. Him with this weird outfit where it's just these like kind of fancier pants. They're like full pants, not bathing suit attire. He just has these like full pants on with a belt on. No shirt. This hairy, manly James Caan body. And they just hang out on the beach for a bit. It's like, okay, there, he's got it. But alas, that's not going to be the ending. It's not a happy happy fairy tale ending here. So he goes to get his share from Leo, who's like, hey, buddy, you did it. Yay, passes him all the money. And then he counts it all. And of course, it's not all of it. Not all that he thought he was going to get. And Leo's like, oh yeah, I put some in this investment in this front that it's gonna be great. Trust me. Only gave him a bit of money up front. And he's like, man, I told you before, this was my one time. I did the labor. He says like the fruits, the yields of my labor. I made this agreement. He has a great speech that he says to Leo. And then things go quite sour. So after that, he demands his money. And then he goes to his car lot, and unknowingly to him, they have captured Barry on the side of his car lot. And as he's going there, he has his gun out. There might be the shoot-off, and then Barry gets shot, and he gets killed just right there at his car lot. And then they surround Frank, and they take him to this weird, like, death room with these weird, like, pools and dead bodies and stuff. And so there's this great speech from Leo where he's just basically like, I own you. You fell into my trap. I played nice guy, but now I own you. I got you that wife. Well, he didn't really do that. I got you that baby. I got you that house. Everything that's yours is mine, and you have to keep working for me for the rest of your life. This is your fault. And looking at this picture, I'm like, he'd be a great penguin. Imagine him in the 2021 or 2022 Batman playing Penguin. That would be great. That'd be great. But this scene was great. And then the camera flips from having him front side up to being upside down. And yeah, it's just such a great low angle shot. The coldness of the frame works well. He's just so cold with him. And he's just, ruthless. And it works so well. And so he tells him, yeah, you're working for me. Sorry, buddy. That's it. And so Frank, he tells Jesse, he says, hey, we're done. Leave. He gives her money and says that, we're over. We're done. And it kind of felt like she was either expecting this or had felt that kind of pain before. Because, like, she put up a little bit of a fight, but then she was like, oh, she had to leave. And then Frank, this absolutely epic sequence, blows up his house, blows up his car lot, blows up the bar. And now it's like this synth, but like with a rock bass as well. It's just so sick. It's just awesome. And it's like, it takes his time. He's like putting all the gasoline on all the cars. He blows up the bar. And then he gets his gun and he heads to Leo's house. He sneaks in at the beginning, smacks the other guy with the fridge, goes to hunt down Leo, who's hiding behind a cabinet. I think Leo gets one shot in, but he shoots him. And he kills him. And his blood looked like ketchup. Kind of looked pretty bad, honestly. It was just very weird and a bit like viscous. But alas. Okay, so, it's just this awesome sequence after he thought he got what he wanted. This awesome revenge sequence of him blowing things up and just murdering the mob boss. And it's like, it's so simple. But the way it was set up and the way it looks, like this frame is absolutely beautiful. Like the intensity of the fire, all those lights at the top of the car dealership, those are incredible. The sequence was just amazing, and it's so simple, but you also had things that like elevated it from its simplicity. You had him right when he was going to Leo's house after burning up his car lot. He throws out his picture, his collage that he made from earlier. And he's like, all right, this life isn't happening anymore. And the reason why I really, really love the end is there's so much parallels with this and his and Okla's experience with prison. He went on this rant in the diner talking about how he needs to get to where nothing means nothing. He needs to get this mental fortitude to survive that environment. And then, if we look at the life that he was living, and he kind of got caught back into imprisonment, Leo being the big bad guy, him parallel to like the guy who was like running the prison and raping younger guys. He's seen as the governing force, and he needed to take measures to follow it. And what measures did he have to take? He had to get to where nothing means nothing, where he has no connections in his life. Okla's dead. He tells his wife to leave him. He burns literally every material possession. His 2 businesses, his house. Tells his kid to get gone with his wife as well. And so yeah, again, he's had experience with it. Even when he was talking to her and telling her, okay, go away. I know what I have to do. There was like a calmness to it because he'd done it before. He got to where he didn't care about himself. And it's kind of, I wonder if there's like this commentary, kind of like in Shawshank, where it's like this normal life, going after being in prison, the normal life is just so foreign and can feel like even more of a burden than prison. And it's very sad at the same time, where it's like, it seems like prison has made him, because of this mental fortitude, that he can't have relationships. He talks about it as like a positive, like an accomplishment. But if we step back and realize that that's just like no way to live life, and the prison has kind of just killed him in a way, because he's never going to be the same, right? He can't have any close relationships. And then like his whole thing, it doesn't seem like he's doing the heist for the love of the craft. He's doing it to get by, right? There's some movies where it's like, oh, it's just, I just love doing crime. It's more of the trope where it's like, oh, it's just, I don't know how to do anything else. And I think that trope is way more impactful because, yeah, he doesn't have any other choice. I mean, I guess he could be a car dealer, might be a little profitable, but alas. And yeah, it also mirrors Oakla's story, where he wanted to die on his own terms. He went into it and he didn't know if he was going to survive or not. He got shot, but he had a bulletproof vest. And this was his way of escaping the prison that was made by Leo. And so he didn't want to die on his own terms. He did what Oakla did. He got out. And so there is some happiness to that. But I think the general sadness comes from, yeah, he literally gets to where nothing means nothing. Speaking of it as a positive, as an accomplishment. But really, yeah. But really it is sad. And yeah, it was his second prison escape. And that background, thinking about all of the background for this one character, this was an incredible character study. It takes the simple narrative of this thief working for a mob boss, doing a heist, getting screwed over, and then killing him. Work so well because of the small details, the research that he put in, the heist scenes that just took so much time and care to show actually what was happening. And just all of this accented by like the way Chicago looks and the glossy lights. Like this frame is just a testament to how the entire movie looked. So many like the circle lights, this frame as well as this frame, with him talking, and just like everything in the background is so dark and so rugged. And yeah, it was, in the end, I was just left. I was like, wow, I don't know what I think of this, but the story was simple. It looked beautiful, but it just was so impactful. And yeah, just thinking about it more, thinking about this parallels to a story, it just works so well. And then all of this, on top of this, I said it was accented by the cinematography, and it was just absolutely just bolded by the score by Tangerine Dream, which was absolutely crazy. And like the synth just feels more introspective and emotional than like a typical like crime, like actiony suspense kind of score. And like the ending scene of him, like the more rocky kind of synth playing, him just walking down the suburban street after killing Leo. Man, it was great. It was so good. And fun fact, the Tangerine Dream score for this movie, Thief, was nominated for a Razzie. I think James Caan was also nominated for a Razzie for Worst Accent. which is very interesting. And from the conversations that I've seen online of people talking about the score, they're saying that this was kind of like more avant-garde at the time. It kind of paved the way for this kind of sound in movies into the 80s, which is really cool. And yeah, I think that's most of what I want to say. There's one other thing. I saw this video by the channel Video Storytellers on YouTube. And they were just talking about the research. So it was an interview with Michael Mann. And what he said was so interesting. I was just like, the way he speaks is so knowledgeable and he's very engaging. And he said when he was doing research for the prison, on like the prison and prisoners in general, the convicts, they had to ask themselves like fundamental questions. And he had this quote where it is, how should I view the rest of my life, the rest of my time in here? Why shouldn't I die? Why am I living? Like, these are these guys who have minimal education, maybe grade school education. And he says that they asked the librarians for like philosophy books. And the most interesting part of what he said that I had to think about for a bit was like, they asked for these books because they really are searching for these answers. And Michael Mann says like they're not doing this to be academic, right? Not because it's a hobby. They're interested in philosophy, but because they need to understand their own lives, their own view of life. And it just, that quote that he said rings so true with how the entire movie went and with James Caan's character, thinking about his backstory and when he told the story of him being in prison. You know that bit of research was imperative to making this movie and telling that to James Caan and having that in the performance. The philosophy and the worldview of being in prison. Figuring out why their life is living, using this philosophy research for a means of survival rather than academics is just a concept it's just so crazy. It's just works so well with this movie, and I just can't praise Michael Mann enough for this one. Yeah, it was great. I think the only pitfalls of this movie were the romance was very, very rushed. It's like, it makes a lot of sense for the core themes of the movie and for James Caan character. This is a character study, but it did feel very sidelined. Tuesday Weld was great, but just in that diner scene, it's like, this was their first real conversation. She's like, hey, I'm just asking you to be with me. But there is a part of me where it's like, yes, he is not used to the real world, and he really just wants to get things going. And maybe, yeah, he's just debated this philosophy of his life so much, and he really just wants to achieve that. And he's like, no nonsense, go for it. And clearly she had some underlying messages in her character where it was like her life hasn't been all roses as well. But yeah, small gripe. And it did, like, you definitely do have to think about the movie. I think at the beginning of the movie does take a while to get going, but then there's just back-to-back, like, killer scenes, like, in the diner. Like, things, yeah, in the diner, the actual ending thievery scene, him blowing up everything, killing Leo. I think the weakest parts were, like, with the cops, kind of. The cops, like, take him at one point and, like, beat him up, just, like, send him a message, and that part was, it just, like, didn't feel like it's needed. It makes sense that, like, the threat of cops on, like, criminals, and it makes sense. It just felt like, yeah, it could have gotten to the more meat and potatoes, the really, really great stuff in this movie. But it was great. And I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Of course, I say every time, Letterboxd reviews, ratings don't really matter. This was a great one to talk about. And, like, thinking about it more, I do like it more. Like, I might even raise it. Who knows? But, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Thief. I really dug the conversation that I put out today. Talking about it was fun. Researching it was a lot of fun. And it's an iconic movie. Started Michael Mann's career. I think everybody should watch this if you're interested in crime movies. It just, yeah, it's a lot more than what the plot seems on the surface. So, yeah, I really love Thief. If you have any thoughts, hey, let me know. It was a great movie. And so, now for next week. I had a few lists of films that I was considering doing next week, but then I just thought to myself, like, which one do I want to do the most? And this is the movie that I've been wanting to watch the most out of all of them. Okay. And it's by the Korean director, Park Chan-Wook, who I really, really like. They had the movie Decision to Leave at Cannes this year, which I really, really want to see. And I can't wait for it to come out. Hopefully it gets a North American release. And so Park Chan-Wook, yeah, he's done Old Boy, which I've seen and I loved. It was absolutely bonkers crazy. Handmaiden, which was so well made and awesome. And there's a few other of his movies that I really want to see. One of them I'll choose. I really want to see Thirst. I really want to see JSA. But the one I'm choosing is Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. Don't know too much about it, but it's been on my list for a while. I really wanted to do a Park Chan-Wook movie. It's on one of the streaming services that I get through my local library. So, hey, I'm going to give it a shot. Let's see. We have Song Kang-ho in the cast, which is just, there you go. That's a reason to watch any movie. So, yeah, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is going to be next week. And next week is the 20th of June. So, yeah, next week, 20th of June, we'll be talking about Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, 2002 film from Park Chan-Wook.